when a person converts, they not only join Judaism going forward, but they join Judaism retroactively. Now, that's a small point, but that's such a powerful point, right? That you're part of the 3,500 years since the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, the 4,000 years since Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We're all part of that, and everyone can say the God of our forefather. Welcome to My People Will Be Your People, Conversion in a Post-October 7th World. Sponsored by Project Ruth, a project committed to formalizing Orthodox affiliation for Jews of diverse and varied backgrounds, welcoming those seeking Orthodox conversion to find meaningful connection to and understanding of Jewish life and practice. I am Rabbi Mintz, founder of Project Ruth, and I am with Meredith Berkman, public health activist and Jewish community advocate, and my partner in producing podcasts that tackle a wide range of issues relevant to the Jewish community today. And we are here at Malka on West 72nd Street. Malka is Eyal Shani's first kosher restaurant. A celebrated Israeli chef, he has brought his talents here to the United States, and it is a treat to partner in these podcasts here with the people at Malka. And just to whet everybody's appetite, here is some signature hummus from the people here at Malka. Everybody is invited. Our guest today is Professor Jeannie Sook Gerson, John H. Watson Jr. Professor of Law at Harvard Law School, and a contributing writer at The New Yorker. Jeannie is the author of a seminal article in the December 9th issue of The New Yorker entitled The Choosing Ones, Converting to Judaism in the Wake of October 7th. This article captures her own journey to and through Judaism and presents an insight into the world of conversion to Judaism today. Welcome, Meredith, and welcome, Jeannie. It's great to be able to be here with everybody. And let's get right down to business. Jeannie, what was the reaction to your article from the different parts of the New Yorker community? And was it what you expected, or was it surprising?
Well, so thank you, Adam. Thank you, Meredith, for having me. It's great to be here to talk with you. I would say the article was a long time in the making, and I started to write it a very long time ago, like earlier this year. And then it took me a while to really put pen to paper. And I think part of it was because it is about my personal journey through Judaism, but it is also one that I knew would touch on many, many issues that many Jews, born Jews, as well as converts, would be interested in and had many thoughts about themselves. And so when I published the article, I knew I was prepared for a range of reactions. And one of the reactions that I expected did not materialize, which was a general negative reaction. I got a lot of positive, very affirming, very appreciative notes to my inbox. But as a New Yorker writer, often, you're writing on things that are controversial. You're writing on politics, you're writing on law, you're writing on, things that are going on in the world. And when I put things out there, it's normal to expect that a lot of people, some of them are going to be upset by what you write. And I hear about it. And so with this article, given that it's about Judaism and it's about Judaism and conversion after October 7th, with all that has gone on since then, and the divisions within the Jewish community, as well as, divisions between Jews and others, I don't know that I knew exactly what to expect, but I did at least expect some people who would say, well, you didn't do this right and you didn't do that right and you got that wrong, or, that Jewish source that you cited doesn't really mean that, or something. I knew there'd be a lot of that, but I was very, very surprised that I didn't get a whole lot of negativity. In fact, I got almost nothing that was personally negative.
Don't give yourself an Ainahura. You know what that means, right?
Yeah. Don't worry. Yeah. So, but I find it interesting, Adam, as you're saying, there is an element of surprise, but there's also a speculation. Is it because I'm a convert and at least Jews know that you're not supposed to be mean to a convert, and is that why? Or is it that the article I think covered a lot of different parts of Judaism, including the Reform movement and modern Orthodoxy. And I had a conservative rabbi who was quoted in there, and it talked about a lot of different divisions within the Jewish community in a way that I hope was not judgmental or really picking sides, and I felt that I was trying to be embracing of all of the different ways in which one could be Jewish while acknowledging all of the ways in which either law or custom or tradition could feel unwelcoming to a number of people and
Can
subcommunities.
I ask a question? One of the things, first of all, I thought this was an excellent piece. And while it's true that I may live in a Jewish bubble, everyone I know, not even knowing that I would be, having this conversation with you, everyone that I know has said, "Did you read the piece? What did you think of the piece?" So there's a lot of interest in it. I think because it is both very intimate and specific to your own experience, but also very universal to the experience of conversion and of being Jewish and what it means to be Jewish and how to be Jewish. I thought it was excellent. What about your own family? I know, you described yourself as having come from a Korean American evangelical Christian community. You questioned a lot. Someone referred to you then as the devil's spawn. I just wondered, what was your own family's response to your conversion journey and or to, and I mean the non-Jewish side of your family, let's say, to the piece?
Well, I think, as I described in the piece, my parents have always been very interested in Judaism and interested in Israel and very, I would say, Jewish friendly throughout my entire life. And when I got married to my first husband, it was not at all what they expected, in that they didn't expect me to be with someone non-Korean. It was not like, "Oh, he's not Christian," or he's Jewish." There was none of that. It was just, "He's not Korean." And that was, and in a way, it was very parallel to the reaction of my Orthodox in-laws at the time, because their objection, of course, was that I was not Jewish. And so, ironically, the two parents really saw eye to eye on the whole situation, and they felt very bonded over that. And over the years, my parents, of course, have been part of my Jewish life, my family's Jewish life. They've attended various, Jewish holidays and Passover, and they've always asked after the kids, like, "Oh, what are they doing for their bar mitzvah?" Or, and they've been there. Obviously, my mother was severely upset that she was not allowed to take photos at the bar mitzvah during the services. So basically, I think they've been very Jewishly involved in my life. So I think that they had some questions like, "Well, why do you need to take this step, given that to us it looks like you're living your life, and we totally appreciate that that's how you're living. So why do you need to actually do this now?" So I had conversations with them about that, and I think that in terms of their reaction, I think that if I had been taking some steps to say I'm no longer Korean, that would have been a very, very different matter. But because it was very clear that there, in fact, are other people in the world who are Korean and Jewish, and also there are Jews of many, many different kinds of ethnicities and nationalities, I think that that is the conversation that made them feel like, okay, this isn't a rejection of you being Korean. And they never really thought, "Oh, is she rejecting being Christian? Is that a problem?" So, and I think that with the article, honestly, the article came out, and then a few days later, or some very short time later, there was a whole bunch of Korean politics going on with, the president declaring martial law and then impeachment. So I think the family got very, very sucked in very quickly into that crisis. And so I'm not really sure there was a whole lot of like, "Oh, we read your article and we thought X, Y, and Z."
I want to just, Jeannie, go back to your discussion about the reaction, and I kind of want to ask a Project Ruth question, and that is that I was mentioned in the article Project Ruth was mentioned in the article.
Well, you were
And I
extensively
also,
discussed.
right. And I also got, I also got mostly positive reaction. The only negative reaction I got was what I would call from the Orthodox rabbinic community, who felt that that Project Ruth's standards for conversion were not up to what they considered would be the acceptable standards. We were either too lax in what we required in terms of their observance level, or we were converting certain types of people that the establishment Orthodox community didn't think we should convert. And I wanted to circle back to a question that we've talked about many times, and that's the question of things like conversion. That within the Orthodox rabbinic community, there's an understanding that even though they maintain very strict standards for conversion, they understand that there are going to be cases within their community in which people are going to need to be converted, even though they don't live up to those standards. Families in which one of the children may have a girlfriend or boyfriend who's not Orthodox, and they're not interested in being Orthodox themselves, but the family requires them to convert. And there was a feeling always, all the years I had this feeling, that, it was kind of a wink, wink, in the sense that, with this, our standard is very high. We understand that these other conversions have to be done. We don't want to know about them. We don't want you to talk about them, but, we'll let them happen. And with this article, what happened was that these kind of secrets all of a sudden were written on the pages of the New Yorker. And I felt that I got a little bit about that pushback, in the sense of, we never dealt with these kinds of conversions before, and we don't want them to be on, in the newspaper, in a magazine, or on the internet. We want them to kind of remain a secret. And I want to just ask your opinion about how you feel about these red lines, about the fact that the article, kind of exposed the fact that there's a different standard of Orthodox conversion, which is equally legitimate, but is not the establishment's position. And the fact that the article was willing to address this, really probably the first time in history that at least in English, that an article addressed this issue.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked, because I remember when I was working on the article, there were some people who said to me, look, these things that you're describing about Orthodox conversions happening outside of the more mainstream or well-known or established system of Orthodox conversions that are regulated, for example, by organizations like the Rabbinical Council of America. And the fact that they exist outside of that system is kind of like an open secret, and it's kind of an under the table thing, and it's kind of a, as you say, wink, wink, or don't ask, don't tell type of system. And that's the way it actually functions and works. And if it's no longer kind of, don't ask, don't tell, then it has a potential to actually, bring crisis into the system. And people might then say your conversion is invalid, or that the conversions of other people who've had such conversions like yours are also invalid. And aren't you worried about that? And therefore, shouldn't you refrain from writing about it? I did get that question. And honestly, I am a writer. I am now a Jewish writer, but I am a writer. That's my professional identity, and that's my professional responsibility. If what's happening is something that I experienced, and my telling the truth about it is something that I believe is to be something that I would do with integrity, and that the people I'm writing about, for example, Rabbi Mintz and the Beit Din and all of his colleagues who do these conversions, they are doing so with principle and with adherence to Jewish law. And given that that is what they are doing, I didn't see anything shameful or anything that should be kept secret about that. Now, as a writer, of course, I don't go around, just exposing people for what they're doing without like interviewing them, or, they're consenting to being written about. And so, of course, I've had these conversations with all the people who are being written about as well. And the thing is, like, I think that there's a choice. Do you act like this is something that should be hidden and shameful, or do you actually embrace what you're doing as something you believe in, that is, principled that is in adherence with law and entirely defensible according to the principles, the norms and the principles and the practices of Judaism. And I decided that to write about it in an honest way, an authentic way, and without pulling any punches was the best course in order to move certain conversations forward and also more authentic to my experience of my own journey.
Question for Adam on that point, which is you say that there was pushback for you and that there was sort of before this Shonda factor, let's call it, which is that it's like, we won't talk about it, wink, wink. That was a big decision for you. I mean, obviously you were converting Jeannie and you know her well and all of that, but I mean, you didn't have to be interviewed for the story. You made a decision. So what are your feelings? Do you have, I doubt you would have regrets, but why did you make the decision to participate in this very open, thorough story, knowing that there would be a very specific kind of pushback, for example, perhaps from the RCA or your Orthodox colleagues?
So that's a fair question. And believe me, I thought about it. And I agree with exactly what Jeannie said. And that is, the wink wink, don't ask, don't tell is not a preferable way to address different issues. Now, it's true. The people who come to me from these kinds of families who need these conversions and, the establishment's willing to wink, wink. So that's okay for them. But what about the dozens or hundreds of families out there who don't know where to turn? They need a conversion within their family. They're Orthodox families. They need a conversion within the family, and they have no idea where to turn. And, to know that Adam Mintz does this, you need to have certain kind of access. I mean, it's not fancy access. You just have to know who Adam Mintz is to be able to do this. And I think what the article did, and we know this because I wake up every morning since the article was published, and I wake up to between 5 and 10 inquiries about conversion from everywhere, which shows that people just didn't know where to turn beforehand. So I think that the article, in addition to all the wonderful things it did, I think it told a story about Orthodox conversion that needs to be told. And that's actually, we're going to service the community. I'll just say one last thing. And that is that, marketing a conversion program is tricky because we don't believe in proselytizing in Judaism. So you don't want to put up a billboard that says, come convert to Judaism, call Min. Right, that's not going to go well.
Better call Mintz.
Right, it's not going to go well. Right, you think the rabbis are angry now? You just wait till I would put up that billboard. So you need to be able to tell people without putting up the shingle. Right, you need to be able to share it. And this article did what I couldn't do in a million years.
I know people personally that, as in with your experience, that there's something about October 7th, people who were living Jewish lives, but perhaps hadn't taken that final step. I know one friend, someone I know socially, and she said, I responded in such a visceral way to October 7th. I was attacked. My family was attacked. And I thought, wait, this is my family. This is the family of my people. Why am I not, I know who I am, but this is the moment. And then that's what she did. And right after the conversion, went back to her apartment and there was a chuppah and she remarried her husband. And, it was very, very beautiful and very powerful. And what I find very moving in my conversations with you, and then of course in reading this article and now speaking with Jeannie, is that in a moment of terrible uncertainty and fear and anxiety, to know that there are people who are literally holding up their hands and say, I throw in my lot with the Jewish people. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Whenever I've seen a conversion, for example, in my own synagogue for years, I always go up to the person and I say, welcome home, because this is family. That's who you always were. And maybe it took you a time to get there. So it's so inspiring to think in this moment, there are people who are choosing to become Jews. I wonder, when you interviewed people, Jeannie, everyone's experience is going to be different about what brought them there. But was there something similar? Like, the first line of Anna Karenina, every family is happy in its own way, or every family has its own mishabas, whatever, that's the Yiddish expression. But was there something singular only, or what would be the overarching? Obviously, everyone you spoke to wanted to become Jewish, but were there similarities that maybe you didn't expect when you were interviewing different people for the story?
Well, I interviewed a number of people, many of whom did not end up actually being named or described specifically in the article itself. So the few people who did appear as named characters in the article, it was a really small portion of everyone I'd interviewed, including rabbis. There were many, many rabbis I also interviewed who were involved in conversions who did not, who informed the article very deeply but did not appear in the article. So, yes, there was an enormous range of experiences and thoughts. Among the converts, I was very moved by the ways in which it was not exactly October 7th that suddenly, kind of, it was like this consciousness raising moment. And then it wasn't exactly like that. Nor did I interview anyone who just had previously not had any connection to Judaism or any experience with it or real feeling for it, who then suddenly decided after October 7th that then this was the religion for them. There was nobody like that. Everybody had some family experience or some kind of other, some experience related to their family or their background that made them predisposed or already kind of in common feeling with Jews and Judaism in some way. And then for a lot of them, October 7th was simply like, one moment or one kind of very serious moment in their journey, as opposed to the thing that triggered them into doing it. So I think that the very common thread also was a reflection, without my even asking, an offering of a reflection on their childhood or their family background, whether there was a religion or not a religion involved. There was something in people's past or in their childhood, even if later on they would rediscover it through say marriage to a partner or being engaged to a partner who was Jewish. There was a connection to something in their childhood, whether it was like a family background that they suspected had Jewish roots or some other thing in their family or something in their childhood where they had contact with a Jewish friend and just felt really intrigued and wanting to be part of it. And all those things were in common with me as well. Of course, my main thing was that I had became engaged to and then married, eventually had children with someone who was Jewish. But when you think back, it's true that would that really have been the same experience had I not experienced in my childhood a range of things related to the Jewish community. So I do think that was something I saw across the stories.
So I'll just say from my experience, what Jeannie pointed out, it's so interesting that when people come and they tell us their story, and what we do is that people, when they come to the mikveh for the final conversion, so they always tell their story first. And without fail, you have these people who come to, to conversion, and they grew up totally not Jewish, but everyone will have a story. Something happened in elementary school. Something happened in my family. There was someone important in my community who was Jewish. And maybe it wasn't meaningful for them in the moment, but later on, now when they're joining the Jewish people, it's those experiences that were so formative. And that really, kind of makes you, makes you wonder for a second, or makes you appreciate for a second that every interaction that you have with people is going to impact those people. We have a name for that. We call it a Kiddush Hashem, right? When you interact with people, you have to have a Kiddush Hashem. Now, you don't make a Kiddush Hashem so that people will convert. That wouldn't be fair to the tradition. But it's interesting to hear in this kind of extreme cases what those Kiddush Hashems of their youth, how they impacted them as they go forward.
I was just going to ask from a rabbinic perspective, has there ever been any writing about, you mentioned, I think, someone with the last name Kroll in the article, someone who said she felt like I'm in the wrong family, right? And I've heard that before. Someone that you and I both know who was Hindu, who said she remembered watching in the 70s, watching like the Holocaust miniseries and thinking like that's my family, but she was a Hindu and she later converted. I guess, has there ever been rabbinic writing or discussion about a bintul yid being like part of someone's neshama, but they didn't know it until the moment they decided to convert, that they're really Jewish? Or is it really just someone who is not Jewish, for whatever reason, decides to become Jewish?
So Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, wrote a book called the Kuzari. It's a Jewish philosophy book. He wrote it in the early medieval period. He wrote it in Toledo in Muslim Spain. And he says that all converts, their soul was at Mount Sinai. So that's really right. That's right. So that's right. So Jeannie mentioned that, and that's something, and that's disputed. Not everybody agrees with that, but that's exactly what you're talking about. The Pinta Layig means that there's something, there's Mount Sinai in everybody. And what the conversion process does is allows you to go back to that moment. I'll just say, since we're talking again, in a Jewish Project Ruth context, that the rabbis asked the following question. In the daily davening, we say, the beginning of the Amida is the God of our fathers, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, for a convert, it's not actually the God of their fathers, right? Means because they only came later. So do they have the right to say it's the God and the God of our fathers? Are they connected to Jewish history in the same way? And the rabbis say that yes, when a person converts, they not only join Judaism going forward, but they join Judaism retroactively. Now that's a small point, but that's such a powerful point, right? That you're part of the 3,500 years since the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, the 4,000 years since Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We're all part of that, and everyone can say the God of our forefathers.
Well, you mentioned your Hebrew name is Chava, correct, Jeannie? So my understanding, and then so I apologize if this is incorrect, especially to the rabbi, that when you convert, you would be Chava bat Avraham Sarah, and that's why, right? Based on what you've just said. I always wonder about that because, as you said, you're not rejecting your parents as parents. Is there something, the first time you were called publicly to the Torah, or the first time that and I wasn't there at your conversion, but the first time you were spoken your Hebrew name with the name of Avraham Sarah, is that uncomfortable, or is that jarring, or is it comforting? How does that feel? Because that's a very specific. I mean, I understand, the point that it's metaphorical looking back, but you're saying you're the daughter of not of your parents, as I would say, having been born Jewish. What does that feel like?
It's something I experience as, yes, I am the daughter of Abraham and Sarah, but so is every Jew. And so, yes, there's a custom of calling you the son or daughter of your actual biological parent. That is a custom. But actually, the convert being called the son of Abraham and Sarah is standing in for every Jew who is also the daughter or son of Abraham and Sarah. And that's how I think about it. And in a way, and maybe this part is uncomfortable, but like, for example, my parents who are not Jews, they're Christian, but they probably think of themselves as the son of Abraham and Sarah just because, that of their belief they actually do believe in the God of the Hebrew Bible. And so in a way, I don't think of this as like a rift from my own family background. And I don't think of it as like I don't think as something as that I'm turning my back on my own parents any more than Jews are turning their back on people who are not named specifically, who are part of their past.
You raise an interesting point, Meredith, because it's really holding both families and holding both realities at the same time. And I don't know, Jeannie, if you want to talk about that, but that idea of holding the two families together and the different members of the family who are in different places regarding your being Jewish and your converting. I'll just tell you my own story before I let Jeannie tell her story. And that is that, this is an especially fraught time of the year for a lot of people who marry converts or the converts themselves.
This year in particular.
That's right. The Hanukkah and Christmas actually coincide this year. That's right. But the idea of how holiday celebrations and how the convert, deals with holiday celebrations and how the partner of the convert deals with holiday celebrations. Something, it's one thing, the convert celebrated Christmas their whole life. So now the question is, that what do they do now that they're Jewish? But the partner, I mean, that was the thing that they grew up thinking, this is the one thing we're never allowed to do. We may not celebrate Christmas. And all of a sudden, now they're being, asked to come to a Christmas dinner, not to celebrate, but to participate. And that tends to be very fraught. So I just wonder, Jeannie, how you balance the different members of your family and their different attitudes in terms of your journey.
That's so interesting. I'm I'm going to answer, but I'm also going to turn it back on you, Adam, to hear your thoughts on that. You just said the one thing you're not allowed to do is to celebrate or even participate in Christmas. And so, do you mean that literally? I think you don't, but like, do you consider that to be kind of a doctrine? Like, as a Jew, you're not allowed to celebrate or be in a situation where you're like willingly sitting there as they're having Christmas, like a Christmas party or a Christmas dinner. And so that's something that I would love to hear you on. I'm going to say basically, there are many cultures in the families that I'm part of. Obviously there's the Jewish culture and religion, my parents who are Christian, and they are, of course, also Korean. There are Korean holidays in the mix as well, many of them, many holidays throughout the year, Korean holidays. My husband, Jacob, my second husband, who has two daughters, have been raised Jewish, but they also have a mother who is Christian, and definitely have always celebrated Easter and Christmas and things like that. And that's, these are all part of the family way of being, a way of life. So I think that for me, it puts a different emphasis on things. And this year I am Jewish, and this is going to be my first Christmas, Hanukkah period as a Jew. And that feels different to me. Definitely. It definitely does feel different to me. But in terms of these cultural kind of mixes and celebrations, I'm not of the view that there's a kind of like purity that needs to happen as a result of, being one or the other. I think my Christian family has always been warmly present at any Jewish celebration and participating in it with their full hearts. And that didn't make them feel any less of what they were. And that's, I think, the attitude that I would want for, at least for myself and my family, to bring to other people's traditions and religions, that you can be warmly present and embracing of that person's important cultural traditions, and while recognizing that you yourself are not of that tradition.
So, Jeannie, as usual, you say it better than I do, and I did, and I agree with you 100%. What I tell the converts or their partners who come to me during this period and say, "What do we do? We're going to go and participate in a Christmas dinner." Exactly what you said, Jeannie. You said, this is your first Christmas, Hanukkah, where you're Jewish, and it's going to be different. It doesn't mean you're not gonna respect the members of your family who are celebrate Christmas, whatever that happens to mean. And this year might be different than next year. They'll be different than the following year, right? Every year they're going to be different experiences, but you respect them. But you know that it's different this year than it was last year. And that's exactly what I tell the converts and exactly what I tell their partners, that you need to respect the families that they're celebrating their holiday, and you need to respect them celebrating their holiday. And as a member of the family, you might participate in that celebration, depending on what the specifics are in each family. But when you do it, you should know that you're doing it as someone who is Jewish at the same time. And I think that's exactly what you said is exactly what I tell people. And it's very hard for people sometimes. They don't understand how they can sit at a Christmas dinner and also feel Jewish. And I think that's part of the challenges. There are a lot of challenges for someone who converts to Judaism. And I think that's one of the challenges. And, over time, I find that people find a comfortable place where they're able to say, we respect this, but we know that we're Jewish. Obviously, this is more complicated when you have children, because young children don't know how to make that distinction. And, these couples speak to me sometimes for months in advance, figuring out how to deal with these, with these Christmas situations with their children and their family and the Christmas tree and presents. And you're right, Meredith, of course, that this year makes it easier because everybody can, on December 25th, everybody can have presents.
But that Christmas, my understanding is that Christmas is less of a theologically important holiday for Christians than, for example, Easter. So I would like to ask you, Adam, where you stand. It's one thing to say we're celebrating a Christmas dinner. It's another thing to say I have to accompany my family to church on Easter because that is their tradition, and that's much more theologically central, right, to Christmas. So how would you come down on that?
So that's funny, Meredith. Sometimes I try that. I tell them, it's not a big deal. Christmas dinner is really no different than Thanksgiving. Christmas is just an American holiday now. Going to church for someone who grew up Jewish is very difficult. Forget the halacha. Right? You want to know what the halacha, what Jewish law says about going to churches? So Rabbi Professor Chaim Soloveitchik, who is part of the Soloveitchik dynasty, and he's both a great rabbi and also a professor of Jewish history. So he always told us when we were in his class that you're allowed to go into a church, but you have to make sure that you look like a tourist. I'm dating myself, but he used to tell us that you should go in with a camera over your shoulder. Obviously, no one goes in with a camera over their shoulder. They just take their iPhone. We don't do that anymore. But the idea we understand, and that is when you go in, you need to go in as a tourist. And I'm sure that Meredith and Jeannie, probably you've gone to see the Horn Moses in the church in Rome. And we always, when we go in there, we look like tourists. Means we're not going into mass, but we're going to look at the Horn Moses. I remember, just to tell you a personal story, that one year we went to visit. We were in Rome and we wanted to see the Horn Moses, and we were in the middle of mass. And I remember my wife Sharon said to us, "We're not going in now. That's not allowed." So we waited until they were finished and they went in. So church, I think, is hard. You say if you have to go with the family, so you go, but you don't really participate. But I think that's especially difficult. I think what we need to do is to kind of focus on the dinner, on the celebration, on the home celebration, and try to figure that out. Luckily, in America, Easter's not such a big holiday. In Europe, Easter's a huge holiday, but in America, Easter is much less of a holiday.
I mean, these questions come up in such an acute way because we do live in a multicultural society, unlike, in the old days in Europe. And then also many of us are living in multicultural families. And sometimes even Jews who were all born Jews still are multicultural because they may be from family traditions that are different depending on what nation they immigrated from. And so I think the multicultural nature of today's life in a lot of America is a big part of this. And Adam, I don't actually perceive you to be saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, that say if a friend dies and they were Christian and then the funeral service was in a church, you wouldn't attend. Is that wrong?
I have attended. Yes,
Yeah.
I would attend.
Yeah.
For sure you would attend, but I'm not participating in a mass in that case. The same way that if your partner is Christian and they went to church on Christmas, then you would be able to sit there. You're not participating, you would sit there. I'm talking about a comfort level. And somehow for a funeral, there's more of a comfort level. I have been to wakes. And and you go and you show your respects. Of course you do. But I'm more talking about the comfort level of people. And people are very sensitive. If you think they're sensitive to Christmas dinner, they're really sensitive to going into churches, which is interesting because they're not necessarily so religious generally. But the idea of going into a church, that they need to speak to a rabbi, and they need the rabbi to say, "Listen, you need to show your respects, but you need to go in as a Jew." Obviously, I wear my yarmulke when I go into a church those couple of times.
Right. So you think they're more uncomfortable with that than the idea of a Christmas tree?
Yeah, they are more. Now, you might, Meredith, tell me that that's wrong. Maybe they should be more, insulted by a Christmas tree. But I'm just telling you the psychology of the Jew. The Jews are more uncomfortable going into church than they are participating in a Christmas tree.
I don't know because that's me. My children over the years have said, I don't get it. Where's the Hanukkah bush? And they know the answer. I mean, that there is something very visceral. It's true, about the Christmas tree, and you hear people who have the quote Hanukkah bush. I mean, all of that is fraught. I actually, if it's okay, I wanted to ask Jeannie, a question about that at the end of your piece, when you talk about this, profound and important and emotional moment of conversion, and that you had two Beitins. You had Rabbi Mintz and his colleagues, and you had Rabbi Bookdahl, who I also know, and a friend as a witness. And I mean, I understand why, because but why again? Why, and what did it mean to you to have both? And Adam, have you been in a situation like that before, where you are doing an Orthodox conversion, where the person has also said, "I want to have a second Beit Din of a different denomination"? Now, I know you have a personal relationship with Rabbi Buchdahl, so I assumed it was that, but I would love to hear you just sort of explain a little bit more about that moment, why you did it that way, and what it meant to you in the way that you chose to do it.
Yeah, so I would say Angela Bookdahl, at the time, her name was Angela Warnick, when I knew her, and I must have met her at age 18. She was the first Korean Jew that I was aware of. And so even just meeting her, like she was an embodiment of something that I could aspire to become from being a teenager. Until that moment, I hadn't dawned on me that a Korean would be a Jew. And she clearly was. And so I think that I think, personally important to me in terms of my Jewish journey, in terms of what she represents. And now she's a very important rabbi, a really important figure in the Jewish community. And I also just really enjoy her presence, her services, and I find her pretty inspiring. So I think that had I not had my main exposure to Judaism, and really prolonged and intense exposure to Judaism in the Orthodox community, I am not sure I would have ended up in an Orthodox space, just given where the rest of my life was taking me. So I think that probably the kind of the Jewish path, if that would have occurred, would have been through Angela and the Reform movement. But I also had spent so many, like, decades, very much in touch with the Orthodox community and Orthodox norms and any services. I went to many, many religious services, and almost none of them were Reform services. So in a way, I felt very at home in sort of Orthodox spaces with Orthodox people. And so it really felt like I really wanted a halakhic conversion that I felt like would be satisfactory to me as somebody who was identified strongly with Orthodox Judaism. But I also felt that Angela and her presence, her what she represented, was something that I very strongly resonated with. And so if it were possible, and it did turn out to be possible, it just felt really fitting that I would have both the halakhic conversion through an Orthodox Beit Din, and that Angela and her way of being a Jewish rabbi and her spirit and her sensibility would also be informing my conversion. And it was wonderful that she was able to be there with her Beit Din, and that the two could kind of be there at the same time. But I understood, because of the denominational division, that they were two separate Bate Din. It was not like one big, unified Beit Din. There were two separate things. And that felt just right to me. And it's really a testament to both rabbis that they thought that that was possible, and that it would not compromise either one in terms of what they were really after and what they were doing. Because I think, halakhically speaking, it doesn't in any way negate or harm the Orthodox conversion. And in terms of the Reform conversion, the presence of Orthodox rabbis and an Orthodox Beit Din also does not negatively affect or harm that conversion.
I thought that was the most powerful and in some ways the most beautiful part of the story, because if this is all about the flexibility or the dynamism of Orthodox Judaism as you are converting people, and that, as you said, it doesn't take away from it doesn't take away from anything. It just adds. Was that the first time that you had a separate baked in from another denomination?
Actually, I have done this before. You're not surprised to hear that there are people, not many, but there are people who have affiliations both within the Reform community and the Orthodox community. And I actually have one rabbi, one Reform rabbi who downtown, and she has reached out to me at a number of occasions to join her in a conversion. Means that she has someone, she runs a school, she has someone in her school who came through her and studied with her, but they have some kind of Orthodox affiliation, and so therefore we join in the conversion. And in those cases, what's a little different than what we did with Jeannie, and that is that we have our bet-in, myself and two other rabbis, and she doesn't come with a bet-in, but she runs the conversion, meaning that she's the one who knows the person, and therefore she is the one who leads the interview of the candidate. And in the mikvah, or before we go into the mikvah room, she's the one who says the different things to the convert. So that's special and that's meaningful because she's the rabbi who the person knows and the person identifies with. So that really accomplishes a lot. I'll just say that I did get a pushback from one rabbi who said to me, I know that there's no halakhic problem with doing a conversion together with a Reform bet-in. He said, but we don't do things like that. So we're still in an age where we don't do things like that. And of course, that's especially sensitive when it comes to the conservative and Reform, because there's no problem with doing things with the conservative and Reform, but they're still living kind of in the 1950s and 1960s where the Orthodox were afraid of the conservative Reform movement. And therefore was like, we don't, what you would say is pasnished, right? It doesn't look good. We don't do things like that. So first of all, I want to thank you, Jeannie, and thank you, Meredith. It's great to be back together with you and doing these amazing podcasts. Do you have any last thoughts, Jeannie, about the article, about our conversation, about where we can go from here?
This may be a kind of a controversial thing to raise as the last point, but I mean, I guess speaking of we don't do things like that, I think that one of the things that I heard that were being hotly debated among Orthodox people who read the article was just the idea of converting someone who, say, doesn't believe or doesn't support the state of Israel, or people who are LGBT or have LGBT, partners who, or in relationships or marriages that are with same-sex partners, and then people, having their children converted. So that whole range of things that did get mentioned in the article, not very extensively, but they did get mentioned. I heard that those were very controversial, or at least being debated a lot about the article. And so I wondered, have you gotten any pushback about your involvement in LGBT people's conversions and things like that, and also the Israel issue?
This, thank you for asking. This is as a final point. This is an important final point. So I was asked last week to participate in a podcast, and I didn't realize this, but the podcaster publicized the podcast as a podcast with the rabbi who converts anti-Zionists, gay, lesbian, and trans people. That's the way he publicized the podcast. And the podcast was basically an opportunity for Orthodox people, and I would say not modern Orthodox, but more like, if this is a term, Brooklyn, Muncie, Lakewood kind of Orthodox, who were literally incensed by the fact that I would convert different kinds of people. Now, the anti-Zionists didn't bother them so much because, the minute you say, would you convert someone to become a Satmar? Meaning all of a sudden they back away a little bit because there are plenty of the anti-Zionists in their camp as well. But, the idea of the gay and lesbian converting members of the LGBTQ community as a red line within Orthodoxy remains. And I knew that was true, and I knew there'd be pushback there. And I think, again, it was very important to say that we understand that halacha permits us to convert people who are members of that community. And we want people within that community or people who know people within that community to be able to take advantage of Project Ruth and what we're doing. So the answer is yes, there was pushback. I'm not sure that he needed to publicize it the way he did, but you know what? It's all fair in the world of podcasts. So we kind of we'll take that as positive publicity as well. So Jeannie, any thoughts on that?
No, I'm grateful. I'm grateful to you for the work you do, and also just for allowing me to have as much access as I did to Project Ruth and your your great work.
It's been a pleasure and an honor, and we look forward to continuing to learn with you for many months and many years to come. Thank you, Meredith. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jeannie. We now get the treat of enjoying some Malka Schnitzel. There's nothing like it. Thank you so
Bye,
much.
Jeannie. Thanks.
Thank you.